Morning. So we're on Chav Beis Amud Beis 22b. So Scott reminded me talking about Michal Raskin, who just passed away. Just went to his Levi in New York on Monday. So he reminded me the story of Michal's beard. I'm for sure missing details, and I'll have to ask Itchy to get all the details about his beard. There's a whole backstory to it. The short story is like this: when he was a child, they were trying to find excuses for him not to need to be in school on Shabbos. You're talking about communist Russia, where you had to go to the government-run schools. So there's always these different ways of getting out of school. I'm missing some details. Anyway, one day he left school or was sent out of school or something or other. On Shabbos, I believe. He went home and he found his father, Aaron Leib, his father's a big chassid who would daven for many, many hours on Shabbos, Tamim, and he died of starvation during the siege of Leningrad. Anyway, so he found his father davening Shabbos morning, davening for hours. He's tears coming down his face. He's crying. The scene of a chassid in such a crazy situation, davening, trying to connect under communist rule. And his father turns to him and says, Michal, what's going to be? What's going to be? And then he tells him, you're going to grow up to be a God-fearing Jew because you don't know what's happening. There's a war, there's a communism, nobody knows what's going to happen with their children the next day, the day after. Good and wonderful families had children who became communists or just got taken by the communists and lost and don't know where they are. The uncertainty was incredible. So he says, Michal, what's going to be with you? What's going to be? Are you going to be a God-fearing Jew? And 9-year-old, 8-year-old kid, his father's telling him this whole dramatic, with his crying and his talus and the whole dramatic scene. He says, yes, of course, of course. And he tells him, you're going to grow a beard. He says, yeah, for sure I'm going to, promises his father at 9 years old. And his father tells him, Michal, Michal, what do you know? You don't know what's coming. What do you? Anyway, that was the scene. But of course, that engraved it. That was a conversation engraved in his mind and heart. I'm for sure missing details and ask you to correct them. Anyway, many years later, fast forward, he comes to America. And in America, like many of the Jews in America, even the good Hasidic Jews, a beard and a sheitel, it's a new country, not necessarily where they're all putting this stuff on. It's a new country, it's the new land, even though they were Chabadnik and he was close to the Rebbe, but he was a chassid, his family's chassidim. And anyway, so I mentioned he was one of those early guys in the early years that everybody looked after. A lot of them were orphans from Russia or from Poland, Hungary. Like many Jews in those times were orphaned with no family, no siblings, no nothing. And they looked after a lot of these young guys, including Michal. So during his engagement, Michal asked the Rebbe in a private audience if the Rebbe could officiate the wedding, which the Rebbe did at the time. And the Rebbe told him, but my conditions for me officiating is that the Kal has to wear sheitel, Kal has to cover her hair, and the chassan has to wear a beard. So, and he didn't have, and Michal did not have a beard at the time, but now he's faced with this. So the Rebbe's like asking him, "Are you going to grow a beard if you want me to officiate?" And he said, at that moment, he had a flashback to that conversation with his father when he was a young child, and told the Rebbe, yes. And I guess that morning was the last time he shaved. The Rebbe officiated his wedding. There's beautiful pictures, beautiful color pictures of him. The Rebbe was officiating his wedding. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. It gives you an glimpse into this person and his lifestyle. Okay. Just because you reminded me, and again, I'm for sure missing details, and I'm not giving it full justice. So you'll have to ask Itchy when he gets back for the full story of Michal's beard. All right. So the Gemara yesterday told us, quoted a Mishnaic text, a Brisa, which says, Sula Slanioi, I'm not sure I pronounce the word, a single girl, virgin, literally, who davens excessively, Valmana Shuvivis, and a widow who's running around from neighbor to neighbor, and a child who hasn't reached his months, a premature child, that's literally the translation. All of these people They lay waste to the world. And we explained yesterday because these are people who are behaving outwardly like they are all holy, but in reality, it's not the case. And we discussed the first two yesterday at a bit of length. The two women, the single girl who hasn't been married yet, and the single woman who's the widow. And when it can be virtuous and when it cannot be virtuous, we explained. So now the Gemara gets to what exactly is this third category, this katan shalai kol lechadashav. So it's the second to last line there. Katan shalai kol lechadashav. My katan shalai kol lechadashav. What exactly is this child who hasn't reached his months? As I mentioned yesterday, the literal translation, and usually in halacha, this refers to a premature child. A child is born, but the months of pregnancy haven't been finished yet. Like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was born at 7 months, right? Which is what? At 7 months. Right, in the 7th month of pregnancy, which is why the mother was able to hide him for a few months until the Egyptian guards came knocking. But in this context, why would a premature baby be the one who lay waste to the world? I mean, obviously, it's not what the Gemara means. The Gemara is using this expression to describe somebody else who's behaving prematurely. So who is that? So says the Gemara. This is how it was translated. Zed, this refers to Talmud Chacham, a scholar, Hamavait, literally which like kicks, which behaves disrespectfully, but Aboisov to his teachers. That's what the Gemara says. Rashi says, why is this person considered premature? Someone who hasn't finished his months. So says Rashi quotes the Gemara in Chagiga, which tells us that someone who behaves like that, who isn't respectful to his teachers, the person is doesn't merit long life. Right? So his months are cut short. Quite literally, this is how Rashi translates it. And perhaps we can go even deeper and say that a student who is being disrespectful to the teacher is premature in the sense that it's to know where his position is, right? The Mishnah famously says a person has to be makeres b'koimai. Person has to know his position. He has to know what he knows and know what he doesn't know. And so long as he's a student and there's a teacher, then he has to have the awareness of that there's much more he can learn. And if he was respectful and listened, he might learn a little bit more. Right? Not assume that he knows everything and he's fighting back already. Right? And that's perhaps why there's the premature element, which leads into the next statement, which is Rabbi Abba translates that what is this person who's premature? Is that Talmud? This is a student. So I think the language is interesting because before it said this is a Talmud Chacham, which argues with his teacher, which means he's already classified by the Gemara as a Talmud Chacham, as a sage. But he has a teacher he should still be learning from. And even if he's not learning from, certainly be respectful. Now he says this is a student, which means he's not a Talmud Chacham yet, but he's a student. He's working there. And he hasn't reached a point where he has been learned enough, or been given the license to instruct, to answer halachic rulings. But because he thinks he knows, nonetheless, he still gives answers to halachic questions. It's kind of something we learned about earlier. The person who learns Mishnah doesn't know the background and starts answering questions because he thinks he learned a few lines. So the person learns a paragraph in the Shulchan Aruch, and the paragraph in the Shulchan Aruch says so and so. So he, I know the answer. And someone asks a question, he knows the answer to the question. And it's quite likely that the next paragraph in the Shulchan Aruch reads, all the above is only when such and such. But if the circumstances are different, the law is different. So had he been a little bit more patient and understand that he still has much to learn, and wait for his teacher to give him the go-ahead that you're ready to give halachic instruction, then he would know to keep quiet, even though he, in his mind, I read the line says the answer is halacha is this. There's always more to know, there's always more to learn. And the person has to have the humility to know when it's right and when it's not right. And this is the example of kol lechadash, of the child who hasn't reached his months yet. It means he's prematurely behaving in such a way where he hasn't reached yet. Yeah. My teacher used to say when I was a kid, you don't put on big shoes. You do that, you'll trip. Step by step, learn what you have to. When the time comes and you learned enough, you'll graduate to the point where you'll be able to instruct and teach and answer questions of halacha. But until such time, know your place and know that there's time still to learn. So these are the two examples of someone who the Gemara describes as this premature child. I mean, he's behaving more advanced than he is, and thus lays waste to the world because he's giving wrong instruction to people, as the Gemara says. Because Rabbi said the name of Rav Huna, we said the name of Rav. What's the meaning of the pasuk? The pasuk is in on the side here. Where's number 4? There it is. Mishlei 7:26. Mishlei is Proverbs. And there it says, Ki rabim chalolim hepilo. Many chalolim means like cadavers, The Gemara is speaking about a woman. The verse itself is actually talking about a woman, but anyway. Batsumim kol harogeha, and mighty are the ones that she killed. So explains the Gemara. Rabim chalalam hipila, the person makes all these people fall. This is a student. Here the Gemara uses the term Talmud Chacham, a scholar. It means he's already a sage. He's already a Talmud Chacham, not just a student. Even though Rashi says Talmud Chacham, but anyway, he hasn't reached the point where he's been graduated enough to be able to instruct, and nonetheless instructs and gives halachic ruling. So he's like chopping people down because giving wrong instruction, people misbehaving because he's taking it on his shoulders.
It's not a Talmud. That's
So
what just Talmud.
Right, Rashi says Talmud, even though the Gemara says Talmud Chacham. And seemingly it should be Talmud because he's not a Talmud Chacham yet. If he were a scholar, he's at the point where you would already be given license to instruct and to give halachic ruling. But this is a student who hasn't yet reached that point. And the next part of the pasuk, which says, "Vatsumim kol harigam," which literally means mighty are those that are killed. But here it translates the word atzumim by taking the vav, as Rashi says, and put it before the tzaddik. So instead of atzum, which means mighty, it's oitzim, which means to close. So the closed eyes cause the death. What's closed eyes? This is the reverse. This is a scholar who was given instruction, has reached a point where he should be instructing and giving halachic rulings. But ve'ena moida, because a false humility doesn't answer halachic questions. So he's closing his eyes. So he's just as bad. So it's both ways. When a person hasn't reached a point where he's supposed to take on these responsibilities, don't take them on. But if you reach the point you're supposed to, then take them on. Don't play this pious false humility. And this really falls in line with the whole general attitude of the last 10, 15 classes we had, is about people who behave outwardly in one way, but on the inside, they're different. But here it's in the reverse. Till now, it's been people outwardly behaving as if they know everything, as if they're scholars, if they're sages. But on the inside, it's not the case. They don't have the insight to back up what they're pretending to be. Well, here it's the reverse. He has what to back up, he has what to teach, but decides not to. It's false humility. The Gemara is telling us it's just as bad. So it's a very thin line a person's walking. It's a very thin line a person has to walk between taking on responsibilities they shouldn't versus absconding from responsibilities they should be taking on. And the truth is, this is perhaps the key role of having a mashpia, having a mentor, having a seilach harav, is to know, there's the opportunity to take on such and such responsibility. Is it for me? Am I capable of getting it done? Maybe there's other people who can do a better job at it, right? Or maybe me walking away from it is false humility, cowardice. Maybe I should take it on. Or maybe me grabbing it is arrogance and I shouldn't be taking it on. These are very delicate questions, and almost always we are biased to ourselves. So if we are predisposed to showing off, we'll grab the opportunity. And if we're predisposed to laziness, we'll let go of the responsibility, saying, oh, someone else can do better. And in reality, we should step up to the plate. It's a very thin line between being the one who shouldn't give instruction, but goes ahead and gives instruction anyway, versus the guy who should be giving instruction and doesn't. It's a very thin line. And a person really needs to consult with others, even a friend, even just somebody else who's objective, who isn't biased like the way we are, can help us sort this out. But there's one caveat, which the Gemara is about to tell us, which is beautiful. Gemara says, Bad Kama. Okay, so to what age should a person not be given instruction? When should he not be behaving as a rabbi? Giving instruction means answering halacha questions and so on, guiding the community. So at what point, how old should he wait to take this position of guidance? Says the Gemara, Ad Arboyin Shnin. He's got to wait till he's 40 years old. Yeah, 40 years old is the age. But the Gemara says, but for Rabba, the great sage Rabba, Oiri, others say it's Rava, as Rashi does, I think. Anyway, there's Rabba who did, Oiri, they did give instruction, they did lead community, they did answer halacha questions, they took on this responsibility. And yet the Gemara says elsewhere that his whole life was 40 years old. He died at 40. So obviously he was under 40 when he was giving this instruction that this is what he did for a living, or this is what he did. Says the Gemara, Beshavian. In the case of Rabba, he was equal. What does it mean he was equal? So says the Gemara, says Rashi. Two translations to what this means. Either this word Shavian, equal, means that he reached, even though he was under 40, but he reached the level of maturity and knowledge that he was equal to the task and equal to those who were perhaps even older than him. So he was able to take on the role of teacher, instructor, of halachic guidance, and so on. Option A. Exception to the rule. Yeah. Option B, says Rashi, maybe he was the oldest in town. So the whole city was less than 40 years old. And he was the oldest in town, so he took on the role, even though he wasn't 40 yet. But perhaps this means not just that no one older than him in age, but maybe no one else can fill the role. Right? In other words, there are times when a person may be under other circumstances would not take on this role. But considering no one else can do it, he has to step up to the plate, even though he himself isn't at that place, which is really what the Mishnah says. If there's a place where there's no men, you try being a man. What does Gemara mean? Does the Mishnah mean? The Mishnah means literally there's no men like biological males, and you have to try to be a male. Are you not a male already? Obviously, the Mishnah means there's a certain role that needs to be filled. And there's no one there, including you. You're not that person who could, which is why it doesn't say, Atatiya ish, you should be the man. There's no man, you be the man. No. There's no man, you try to be the man. It's quite possible that the role that's required to fill here is not your capacity. But considering nobody else is here, so you're going to step into it because nobody else can do it. That's right. That's right. And if a person steps into that plate, then Hashem will give him the help he needs. So again, all of this requires lots of delicate, nuanced sensitivity to the circumstances. Am I capable? Am I not capable? Am I being arrogant? Am I being falsely humble? Is there nobody else that can do it? Am I over? All these things require delicate and sensitive, thought. And this, to me, seems like the key role of having a mentor, having someone to talk to, is in these kinds of questions. When we're biased to the circumstance, even something as little as someone's, Gemara keeps using the language hayra, like someone who reached the age of instruction. If you reach the age of instruction, the knowledge of instruction. So hayra also means like lesson, like are you the person should be giving lessons? Yeah. So we see somebody else misbehaving, genuinely so, and we feel the urge, I have to go correct them. Is it your role? Maybe this person needs to be correct. That's true, but is it your role or not your role? Have you reached the point? Is it just me doing it because I want to get it off my chest and it annoys me? Or is this really for the other person's benefit? Is there somebody else in the city who maybe has a better relationship with this person, who that person can speak to them? It's something as small as that. A little, the Gemara says instruction. Hey, I'm giving this person a lesson. And the lesson you're giving is a good lesson. Right? But to know when and where is very difficult. And a person really needs to really take into consideration and have someone they can talk to objectively. Is this my role or is it not my role? Especially when the Gemara says like hayra, where I'm instructing others, certainly a person has to be careful and make sure that's actually his role. And he's not playing a role that he shouldn't be playing.
That seems parallel, based on If you're able to do it, you have to really know where you're coming from.
That's right. It's the last resort,
Right.
and you'll have to do it. Okay. Now let's do a few more lines. This Gemara is about to begin a new discussion, but we'll do a few more lines. Okay, so all of this was from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that there were 4 people, right? We just quoted a Mishnaic text which said that 3 people lay waste to the world. The single girl who excessively davens, we discussed that yesterday. The widow who runs around to her neighbors, we discussed that yesterday. And then the third today is the premature student, the student who behaves like he's a rabbi when he hasn't reached that stage yet, or the other way, the rabbi who's absconding from his responsibility as a rabbi. But all of that was because the Mishnah, our Mishnah here in Sotah, said that there were 4 people, 4 types of people who lay waste to the world. A woman who's celibate, right, behaving celibately when in reality she should get married and have a healthy, intimate life. Number 2 was the pious fool, chassid shaita, the one who's pious, but in his piety ends up being a fool, right? The guy who's pious and therefore lets the naked women drown because he's being all holy. And the third one was the cunning, wicked one, meaning the person who not just misbehaves, but does so with cunning. I didn't technically break the law, but in doing that, I messed somebody else over, right? We discussed that at length. And then the fourth now is makas perushin. I think it was 4. I don't remember that there was a 5th. Pretty sure it was no 4. It was Rabbi who said this. And the last category is the makas perushin. That is the person who literally engages in self-flagellation, like, hits himself in the back and wants everybody to see how humble and pious, how humble he is. But in reality, he's full of himself and very arrogant. And in fact, his supposed piety, his supposed humility adds to his arrogance because he wants everybody to know how humble he is. Right? What's the what's the joke? A guy who holds himself to be a scholar, but he's also humble. He's like that kind of guy. And they come to him to give him the special aliyah, shvi. Some communities shishi, shvi, whatever. They came to give him the special aliyah on Shabbos. He's humble, right? She says, no, I'm not going to take it. Whatever, it's fine. Just get somebody else. I don't need it. No, you're the big Talmud Chacham. You have to come. You want to give you the special aliyah? No, don't worry about it. So they actually give in, and they go to somebody else. So of course he's annoyed because they were supposed to push him until he finally says, "Okay, I'll take it if you want." That's what he wanted. But in the end, they just said, "Okay, you don't want it, no problem. We'll get to the next guy." So they go to the next guy, and the next guy also says, "Nah, it's not for me. I'm a nobody." And the first guy says, "Who does he think he is, being so humble?" Right? So that's the makas perushin. That's the guy who behaves all humble. Literally, makas means hitting himself. He hits himself to try to show everybody how humble he is, taking on this what's the word? Not flagellation, is that the word? Self-deprecating behavior to demonstrate his humility, but in reality, he's full of himself. So the Gemara says like this. Tan Rabbanan, quote him Brisa, which says, Shiva Perushin Hain. There are 7 types of Perushin. Perushin, in the context here, there's 3 translations we can think of as Perushin, and they're all kind of necessary to understand what's going on. So as we've been translating till now, it's righteous. At least he behaves righteously outwardly. But the word Parush also means someone who's ascetic, separates himself. Parush means someone who separates himself. So he behaves ascetically. I'm all holy, I'm humble, I'm this, I'm that, separates himself. Parush. In 14th, 15th century Europe, being a Parush was like a title. Someone who was a Parush is someone who, didn't eat meat for years and years, didn't sleep on a bed for years and years. This was like the holy status of the pre-Hasidic era. The public displays of humility, for lack of a better term. They were called Parush, right? Now, the word Parush also has a historic connotation, which is, in English, I think you call it Pharisees, right? Which is in the times of the Mishnah that we're discussing here. And the Jewish people were splintered amongst the various different attitudes towards Torah. We have Judaism as we know it today, true and right Judaism that survived till today, because it survived till today because it's true and right, is Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, and Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, as we know it today. Now, then there were the Tziddukim, the Sadducees, who believed only in the written Torah, not the oral tradition. And there were other groups, other splinter groups, the Karaites, the Essenes, the Biryonim, the rebels, all kinds of different groups. Now, each of these groups had a different political attitude towards Rome. Towards Rome. The Sadducees really were in bed with the Romans, briberies and whatnot. And then you had the rebels who wanted to cast off the Romans. And you had all kinds of shades in between. This is the era, the last century or so before the destruction of the Second Temple, right? This is the splintering. We talk about the infighting amongst Jews that caused their destruction. This is what we're talking about, the infighting amongst the different classes. Now, the Chachamim, the sages, they were called the Perushim because they separated themselves from the whole political question. They said, we're not getting involved. We don't care. They separated themselves. Many of them even left Jerusalem, even though Yerushalayim was where the temple was, because the temple for a lot of times was controlled by the Sadducees, because they bribed the Romans to get themselves into position of being the high priest. So the Chachamim, the sages, said, we're going to focus on building Torah. We understand that Torah is going to, what's going to make Jewish survival. The temple could be here, and the temple could not be here, but Jews need Torah to survive. Right? This is the beginnings of what later led to the writing of the Mishnah after the base of English is destroyed, and then later the Gemara, and all of Torah as we know it today. So they were Perushim. They separated themselves from the whole discussion. They separated themselves from the whole community. And off they went, studying Torah.
Where were they conquered? What region was it then?
Mostly Yavne. Yavne, Kerem B'Yavne. Right? This is when Birchanan Zakkai asks Vespasian to spare Yavne. Doesn't ask him to spare Jerusalem. Doesn't ask him to spare a temple. He asks him to spare Yavne, understanding that the yeshiva of Yavne, the Torah learning, is what's going to make Jews survive in the inevitable exile that's to come. So these are the Perushim. They're called Perushim. They were separated. So these are the different translations of the word Parosh, and it's all relevant, as we're going to see, because first the Gemara is going to talk about the person who behaves ascetic, separate, he's behaving all holy, but only outwardly, inwardly, not so much. And then the Gemara is going to switch to the political class of the political meaning of Perushim, the people who separate themselves, the ones who believed in the oral tradition as we do, our spiritual ancestors, as it were. The Gemara will talk about them and their relationship to a king named Yanai. So we'll get to that soon. But for now, says the Gemara like this. Shiva Perushim, there are 7 kinds of, quote, righteous people, or behave outwardly righteous. Separated from the community, they're special, they're holy. Pirush, I'm not going to be able to know the translation of all of them, so I'm going to try my best. Pirush Shechmi, a Shechem-like Parosh, Shechem being the town that Shimon and Levi murdered because they raped Dinah. Right, that's the story of a few weeks ago. So the Parosh that follows the ways of Shechem. Okay. Pirush Nakfi. Nikfi is which one? The one who bangs himself. No, sorry. Yeah. Pirush Nakfi, the one who bangs himself, the ascetic one. Pirush Kazai, the bloodletting ascetic one, the bloodletting Parosh. Parosh Meduchya, the Parosh who's like a pestle. What's it called? A pestle. The pestle and mortar. You know pestle and mortar is like you have like that thing that crushes herbs and spices. Yeah. So a pestle type. Yeah. The Parosh is like the pestle. Pestle, I think to pronounce it. Pirush Machai Vasi Vasena, the one who is ascetic and says, "What's my obligations? I'll do it." Parosh Ma'ava, the one who is Parosh out of love. Parosh Miyida, the one who is Parosh separated out of fear. Those are the 7 categories, all of which are in the negative sense, as we're going to see. The Gemara is going to go through each one. What exactly are these people? So let's start from the beginning. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we'll start. Where are we? Okay. Perosh Shichmi. The Parosh, the one who's a Parosh who behaves like Shechem. What's this? This is the one who behaves like Shechem. What does behave like Shechem mean? So explains Rashi. The people of Shechem, after the incident with Dinah, Shimon and Levi told them, you guys want to marry our daughters, no problem. You guys all have to have a bris. Right? So they all got circumcised. And then on the third day, they went and killed the whole town. But why did they circumcise themselves? Not because they wanted to connect to God or Torah, but because they wanted women. They wanted to marry Yaakov's daughters. Right? They wanted to marry. They wanted to become They wanted to intermarry with the Jewish people. So there's ulterior motive. That's the part of Shechem, the one who behaves aesthetically for personal gain, not for the truth of what it is, but for personal gain, and personal gain in the material world. Like for example, I was blown away by this. It's many years ago. It's going to be at least 15 years ago. When I was in Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, so I used to go on Friday afternoon. I had my route in Tel Aviv. I'd go from store to store. It was a street with bakeries and pizza shops and falafel stands and that kind of thing. And I put on film with the guys. And there's one guy who had like a shoe shop, and every week I put on film with him. I inherited the route from someone before, so kept on putting in film with the guy as I was instructed. But this guy wore a yarmulke, and he had a picture of the Rebbe and I don't know, Baba Sali or something in his store. And I asked him once, I put on film with you every day, every Friday, so that means you don't put on film in the morning. What's with the keep on pictures? She told me it's better for business. Tourists come in, they see a guy with a yarmulke kind of thing, they figure I'm more honest, and that's why I do it. So I don't want to say anything negative about another Jew, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. Someone who does this just for ulterior motive. Okay, let's stop over here. We'll get to the other translations before because we're getting late already. But God willing, tomorrow we'll see. So this is only first of 6 more of these Perushim, these people who live ascetic lives, but in reality, it's all for show or for personal gain. More on that tomorrow, God willing.
The litigants went to court, so guy wore litigants wore the judges know what's this week's parsha, and he didn't know.
I didn't say that one, but that's similar kind of thing.
That's like when I was flying to New York, and this early.
But the Romans were in charge of making the Kohen
border
Yeah.
region.
How long was that for?
System says when you're going to New York.
Probably a century. I don't know how long. A long time before the
10 years?
100 years. For a long time. I don't know if it was full century. Extremely corrupt.
Yeah.
The Hashmonaim, which took over
Are you going to be in Shul tomorrow?
throughout the Greeks and became kings after Hanukkah. The
You
Hashmonaim,
have to see the
they
guy.
became very corrupt very
Jews
quickly.
everywhere, the guys.
2 or 3 generations later, they were very corrupt already.
They didn't say synagogue. He said
So the first generation was good, and then 2 or 3 generations later, very corrupt. And then they were taken over by Hortus, who started his own line, the Herodian line of kings. They were also very corrupt, maybe even worse. I mean, talking about murder.
Couldn't do anything.
Yeah, they killed the Chacham also. They tortured the Chacham because they knew the Chacham were the biggest threat to them. We're going to see tomorrow when we get to the story of Yanai that they were kings Jewish kings who behaved horribly to the Chachamim because they knew that they were undermining their authority. Because a lot of the masses of people said, "I'll go to the Chachamim better because they're more truthful instead of going to these people who are corrupt and whatever." So the Chachamim were the biggest threat to them.
So in other words, that was the second basement.
End of the second base, towards the end of the second base of Midrash.
2 questions for
Yeah.
Rabbi.
A wonderful day. Yeah.
I had these questions for a while, kind of, but one popped into my head this morning, and they both seem to revolve around today's. You being born through.
Yeah.
Right? Does it ever, today, like today, in today's life, not talking when you were a kid, talking about today, does it ever happen where you have to slow down and say to yourself, wait a second, I'm not sure about the halacha on this, for yourself?
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, that you have to go and you have to check to make sure.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Even when I'm almost sure I know, especially if somebody else is asking me the question.
No, somebody's not asking, I'm talking
I'm
about
saying
in
In my own life, I
day-to-day
also ask questions for sure.
No, but in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, yeah.
You ever like, well,
I'm
I'm
not sure.
about this?
That's right. And even if I'll look it up and I'll read it, and I think I find the answer, I'll confirm it with somebody, with a more senior rabbi.
Okay,
For my own life for sure, and especially when people ask me questions, even if I'm 100% sure of the answer, I'll first confirm. I'll call and say, someone asked me so-and-so, and I think the answer is so-and-so. Is that correct? I'll tell me, yeah, yes. I'm not at the stage yet where I can just take it on my shoulders myself.
no, I'm just,
So if my own life, yes, and certainly when other people ask me, I definitely consult with Rabbi Banon. Rabbi Banon, he's who I consult with on these kinds of things.
the other question is this. Does anyone ever achieve a true balance between being, let's say, a chassid and a shrewd businessman? Where there's people who
Yeah.
achieve like this perfect balance in life where
I like to think my mother's father was like that. Shai Tridom. He was a chassid with a full beard, did everything a chassid does, including being extremely honest in business. And Baruch Hashem, he was materially successful.
okay,
I'm sure I was like him. I'm just saying my firsthand experience. My mother's father, to me, is the model of that. Someone who was a businessman. He was another guy who didn't like when you called him rabbi. He corrected you, say Mr. Reb, he'll let you get away with. Right?
So
But
when
a
I
successful businessman, shrewd businessman, but chassid all the way.
so when I'm reading in a book, or let's say the old dictionary, where there's like an R dot and then the name, does that mean that person was ordained as a rabbi?
Yeah, so
Even though
it's-
they don't.
Yeah, so it could be that they're like ordained as rabbi or knew enough to be a rabbi, but didn't practice as rabbis.
Right.
It's like a reb, It's kind of like an honorary title, but it's not a functioning title per se.
Okay,
Something like that, yeah. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.
you too.